What's up, game devs? In this installment of our catch game template reskin, we are going to dive into updating the falling objects from the nuts, bolts, and screws in the default demo game of nuts and bolts over to our baseballs for our baseball catcher game. In the prior video, we took a look at how to update from the bucket to a baseball glove and get all of that set up. So let's go ahead and dive in. First, as always, I like to test things right out of the box, make sure everything's working good before we start updating. So let's hit play. You can see we have updated our bucket in the default game over to a baseball glove, and that is all working properly. And obviously those big bolts don't seem to fit in the glove very well, but we're about to change that. So let's take a look at one of our prefabs here. Let's pull one of our prefab nuts in, and looking at this right away, you can see we've got the object is made up of two sub-objects. We have the nut body, which has our sphere collider on it, and we have the image, which has our sprite image on it, so that this can interact with the 3D bucket and all of our 3D physics here, as well as utilize some of Unity's 2D features. If we were to look at one of our other objects like the bolts, you can see that in comparison, this actually has three pieces to it, a little more of a complex shape. So similar to our nut, we have the 2D image, which is holding our sprite, and we have the bolt head, which again is a sphere collider, but we also have this bolt shaft object, which has a capsule collider to cover up the shaft of that bolt. Let's go ahead and delete these off screen, but we'll leave this the prefab nut here, because what I actually want to do is update this one into our baseball. From testing the game out, you could see that the size of this worked fairly well for our glove that we've set up. So let's go ahead and start off by changing the image here from the blue nut over to our blue baseball. But looking at this as a whole, you can kind of see that obviously our image is a little bigger than our collider, and we could naturally increase the collider, but I like the size of the original object. So let's change this image down and actually go with 0.75 and 0.75. We take another look and we can see that this is pretty good sizing to match that up. But what you want to look at next is with how does that object work, right? So we have our default image here that we've updated to the baseball, but within the falling object itself, we have this nut screw here, and within that you can see we have a couple different color variants. Now this is what actually is utilized as the game determines to switch between one of the different objects. So we have a sprite object for the blue nuts, the purple nuts, the green nuts, and the orange nuts, and we can go ahead and update those within our game. So let's set the blue ones to our blue stitch. Let's set the purple ones to our black stitched baseballs, and we'll set the green ones to our red stitch. Now we obviously only have three different baseballs, so this fourth one, let's go ahead and set that to the gold coin. And each of these has a score value as well. So you can see the blue ones are worth 10, purple's worth 20, green is worth 50, and orange is worth 100. So that will correspond to our blue, black, red, and our gold coins. Now our max ranges here are actually what is utilized in order to determine which one it spawns. So as the spawn logic kicks in to say, okay, let's spawn another falling object, it decides that it's going to spawn one of these nuts, or in this case a baseball. It throws a random number between 1 and 100, and using these values will determine which one of these it sets itself to. So if it's between 1 and 40, it'll adjust it to a blue ball. If it's between 41 and 70 to the purple range, 71 and 90 to the green range, and 91 to 100 to the orange range, which will update our sprite and our score value for the object. So as it spawns, you'll be able to see that the score value gets set. And then another nice little feature of these is that it will actually set this stuck limit counter as it falls. So within our game, as an object gets spawned just above the top of our screen, it'll start counting every frame how long it's been above the screen, and if it gets stuck for any reason whatsoever above the screen and never falls into play, after 50 frames it'll automatically reset itself and be available for another object to fall. And the other thing that you can notice within the script is the can score Boolean or true false value. This is used so that as soon as this makes contact with our glove or the collider within our glove, it'll automatically set this to false so that there's no chance of you getting a double count of the score, the player getting scores multiple times, as you know, if this falls through the bucket collider or the glove collider before it actually resets and is available to be spawned again. So that is actually all we have to do in order to set up our baseballs for this reskin. Well, let's go ahead and rename this from prefab nut to prefab ball, and we'll drag this down into our prefabs folder so that we can have that available. And we just want to double check and make sure that our tag is set to good egg, right, so that it knows this is something the player is wanting to catch. And we'll delete this from our scene. Now, in order to ensure that the new objects are getting spawned, let's take a look in our managers container and look at our spawn manager. Now, the spawn manager is just an empty object that sits just above the screen out of player's view, and this is what's determining what to spawn and where within the range of the screen width. Within this, it's currently set so that you have a spawn for the screw, the bolt, and the nut, so that it knows the prefabs to use. So we can go ahead and change that from spawning a nut to spawning the ball, and let's test her out. Alright, well, right off the bat you see some of those balls falling in the background, and we're still spawning our bolts, and obviously at some point, if we play long enough, we'll see that the screws start to spawn, and you can see the different variants of the ball that we changed in the coloring, as well as the gold coins that are falling. So all of that looks to be working pretty good. So next problem is we don't want bolts and screws to be falling, right? So the first thing, you're thinking, okay, well, let's just change those over to our other prefab and set all of those up as the prefab ball that we've set up, which ideally should work pretty good. But what you'll notice when we go to hit play on this is that as objects start to fall, and let's pause it, we see that some of these are spawning pretty more, but we start getting these null reference exception errors, and we don't like those in our games, right? Okay, so let's see what's actually causing that null reference error. Within the catch game template, let's go down to our scripts folder, and let's open the spawn manager. And within the spawn manager, let's take a look at what's actually going on here. So once our objects get spawned right here within our spawn logic, it's going to start spawning these, and every time it spawns the screw, well, everything should be working fine because it's not actually calling anything specific. But when we get down here to the bolts, you'll see that as it goes to spawn, it's calling the random me function of the bolt script. Well, we don't have any bolts anymore because we used the nuts prefab in order to switch all of our assets over. So our ball prefab actually has the nut script on it, on all of them, rather than that bolt script, right? So in that aspect, it works fine when it goes to spawn one of the nuts, not so much when it goes to spawn the bolts. Well, one, as a simple solution, we could update the scripting, right? We could come back over here and we could say, well, don't spawn a bolt, let's spawn, you know, it's got the nut script on it, so let's spawn, use the nuts random me function, right? And that would work. Another option is within this scripting for the spawn manager, you can see we have our ranges. So the max screw range is 10, the bolt range is 55, and the nuts range is 100, right? So just like with the color variants within our falling objects, this is a 1 to 10, this is a 11 to 55, and this is 56 to 100. So if we change these to 0, we've got a 0 out of 0 chance to spawn a screw, 0 chance to spawn a bolt, and now we've got a 1 to 100 chance to spawn a nut. So we actually will not spawn any of these prefabs that are set to the screw and the bolt, and will only spawn the ones that are sitting within this nut prefab right here. So we can go ahead and test out our game. And while we're testing it, let's go ahead and bring in our console over there, and we can see we're not actually getting any of those null reference errors again. So again, two ways to update that. One would be if you wanted to update the code and change the logic within the code, you could do so and actually change the script that's being called within, you know, the bolt spawning over from, you know, bolts over to nuts, and that would work. But again, you know, it's set up so that you can update this without changing any of the code by just adjusting these ranges here. So that would work if you had, let's say, 2 different falling objects in your reskin. You could set that to something like 50, and now you've got a 1 to 50 chance for spawning this prefab right here, and you've got a 51 to 100 chance of spawning this prefab right here. All right, that's going to do it for this section of the tutorial. Join us in our next video where we take a look at adjusting the gameplay mechanics so that, you know, now that we only are spawning the balls, we don't have any bad eggs to catch to drop our health. So let's take a look at how we're going to fix that in the next section.